This morning's lesson from Revelation that Ian just read so well is often heard at funerals because it offers promises of a better place with God. The Alpha and Omega is fully sensed from the beginning to end as we drink from the spring of life. It's a place where there's no longer chaos, death, mourning, tears, or pain. The verses in Revelation that follow our lesson add that bad is also gone, and those verses note there are angels and that God's radiance is experienced everywhere, all the time. Revelation is, of course, describing a heavenly place. It sounds like the heaven we often think of and hope that our ancestors, beloved, and ourselves go to in the great by and by. John, the author of Revelation, envisioned heaven coming to earth. It shouldn't be a surprise since Jesus taught that heaven is near and how loving acts toward the well-being of others helps heaven break in on earth. The idea of heaven on earth for the living can strike us as unusual since heaven is most often associated as being a part of the afterlife. And while we challenge ourselves to follow Jesus' teachings and focus on living to bring heaven to earth for the living, a big part of church ministry includes participating in the life matters, conversations around the afterlife. Thoughts and hopes of heaven are, of course, a big part of that ministry. We consider biblical and theological reflections around death and worship and in classes. We also pray for those who are dying and families of those who have passed on. We provide end-of-life related ministries, which this church, I must say, does very well, with kind and caring outreach to families, thoughtful, loving memorial services, and gracious hospitality at receptions for families and friends. Our shepherds and pastors face death and dying out in the field too, in hospitals and hospices, homes, and anywhere else they are needed. It's never easy work. Those times are intense and grief-filled and humble our beings and dwarf our words. And a part of the humbling and diminishment of the value of words is that those occasions are somber and deeply sacred. To be in the presence of death is to be so near the threshold between heaven and earth that you can feel what theologically I name as the power of the divine pouring out and into the transformation from this life to what follows. And somehow just providing care for the dying or their loved ones allows the caregiver to experience that threshold and that divine power emanating. There's immense awe and wonder to it and an electric-like current of love. And there's mystery in it all. And most of us here this morning probably feel comfortable naming that mystery and power and awe and wonder and love God. Some in the culture, maybe not so much. By whatever name, it is undeniably present. I've experienced it repeatedly and uniformly. Others report the same experiences. It's observed without regard to belief or faith, making it an objective truth. It exists. And the same can be said of life noticeably leaving those who die. Regardless of belief, we can tell when a soul that animated a body no longer resides in the body. So it's also an objective truth that the presence of consciousness, the soul, departs. Webster's Online Dictionary defines the soul as, quote, the immaterial essence, animating principle, or actuating cause of an individual life, in outside their religion, regardless of belief, it is objectively true that each human has such a soul. Souls are part and parcel of our individual consciousness that appear to be as unique as snowflakes and fingerprints. No soul are alike. What souls are, what consciousness is, and where they go at death, by and large, have pretty much been left to religions to take seriously, except for assessing the cause and physiology of a body's life forces. Mainstream science, as a rule, does not provide much in the way of answers, and frankly does not seem to want to deal with or simply can't due to its own dogma or repulsion for mystery. And those scientists who do seek answers are marginalized or ignored, and at any rate have been relatively few and far between. And consequently, many in the West, raised to rely solely on the tools of the Enlightenment, tend to set aside evidence relating to death and out-of-body consciousness. It's thought to not be scientifically understandable, so we ignore it, or scoff at it, or go along with science general dismissal. But just as it's okay to challenge religion, it's okay to challenge science, especially in this area it seems to know so little about. And I'm going to do some of that challenging, and in case this disturbs anyone, I remind you, no one has to agree with the pastor in this church. I realize I'm going out a bit on a limb, but I deal with death and dying a lot. And it is more than a little troubling that there is such a chasm between evidence around death and dying and science. And the limb I'm going to wander the most out on is what are called near-death experiences, at the age of reason's general dismissal of them, and with virtually no more than a wave of a hand, as if they are akin to UFO and Bigfoot science. I want to start with human consciousness. Science has yet to explain consciousness. Science may not understand it, but we know it's there. The evidence of individual consciousness, of souls, is as simple as knowing that we have thought. I think, therefore I am. Science has also yet to explain why that thinking, that individual consciousness, is needed to animate a healthy body. Why does it drive our life on Earth? Science has also yet to explain where consciousness goes when it leaves the body, other than to confirm it's left our life on Earth. And while science seems to be satisfied that gone is gone, it does not explain it, nor the powerful nature and mystery surrounding death and dying. Mainstream science does not account for the evidence of countless reports across time and cultures of people experiencing consciousness out of their bodies in what are called near-death experiences. In short, mainstream science has yet to provide understanding of basic, existing, empirical evidence around death and dying. Sadly, science mostly seems to ignore what it cannot explain about all of this. And I want to make this clear, I love and I respect science, I really do. But sometimes it can be as dogmatic as religious fundamentalism when it comes to consciousness and death and dying. It's estimated that there have been 25 million near-death experiences over the last half-century. So this isn't some kind of obscure happening like a UFO sighting or Bigfoot. Ignoring the phenomenon because it doesn't fit pre-existing scientific dogma is, well, unscientific and dogmatic. And this is especially so since not only do we know that an estimated millions of experiences have happened in the past half-century, over the centuries there have been countless reported experiences of people experiencing consciousness out of their bodies in near-death experiences. And there are also scientists giving reports, nurses and doctors and psychologists addressing those experiences. The evidence exists. Those reported experiences at the very least allow inferences, and they allow probabilities to be thought about and considered. And It's okay to be skeptical, even of the mystery of it, but it's also okay to weigh and take comfort in the possibilities the evidence suggests, even those the mystery suggests. In the reported experience, there is evidence of uniformity, including numerous reported reports of people undergoing a drawing out of this life and a moving into moments of dimensions in an afterlife. And these reports have not just occurred in the past 50 years, but throughout history. Yet science, by and large, dogmatically denies or denigrates the reports as being driven by belief and faith, which is not only inaccurate, but ironic, since scientific knowledge is based on belief and faith itself. Science requires a belief that there is word to the world, and a faith that it can be understood based on human observations and human conclusions. And adding to the irony is scientists claim to scoff at dogma, but tend to be dogmatic about their own belief and faith, so much so they dismiss objective truths and evidence around death and dying, all of which tends to head off widespread scientific discussion of the reasonable inferences and probabilities of what we do know. Countless reports of afterlife experiences by people in near-death situations may not prove they had one, but it's not an unreasonable explanation for the report. The truth is, it's actually reasonable to consider and hope it is a probability, especially since the consensus of science provides no alternative explanation beyond simple disregard. And that's not true of all scientists. There are very serious, well-researched books by a few scientists on death and dying. And I found one in particular very helpful. Fortunately, fate or coincidence or serendipity or God actually caused a once very skeptical scientist to see for himself and gain understanding. It's a remarkable story. An agnostic neurosurgeon and Harvard professor, Dr. Eben Alexander, lived through a near-death experience caused by a week-long coma. He then applied his learning to the experiences of both his biological state of being and his soul's conscious state of being during the coma. Published his experiences and findings in an excellent book filled with science and wonder and awe and love. The book is called Proof of Heaven. I often recommend this book to people who are grieving the loss of loved ones. The book offers reason, and it offers so much hope. And just as you'd expect a Harvard professor to do, Dr. Alexander articulates his experience very well and offers compelling evidence and science related to the existence of out-of-body consciousness, including a very hopeful and uplifting glimpse of where consciousness may go when it leaves the body. He uses his own personal experience, observation, and training to explain and reason what occurred. He also uses science. He uses it to dismantle the scientific community's attempts to deny his experiences and his conclusions. And I was reminded of Dr. Alexander's wonderful book when I read the lectionary lesson. They both have similar images and description. Dr. Alexander does not just rely on applying his scientific training to his own observations either. After writing down what he observed, he also researched deeply other works and observations regarding his near-death experiences. And his initial summary, before getting to details, captures the gist of it. He writes, quote, "Finally the day came when I had written everything down, and then it was time to read. And I plunged into the ocean of near-death experience literature, an ocean into which I never so much as dipped a toe. It didn't take me long to realize that countless other people had experienced things I had, both in recent years and centuries past. Near-death experiences are not all the same. Each one is unique, but the same elements show up again and again, and many I recognize from my own experience. Narratives of passing through a dark tunnel or valley into a bright and vivid landscape, ultra-real, were as old as ancient Greece and Egypt. Angelic beings sometimes winged, sometimes not, went back to at least the ancient Near East, as did the belief that such beings were guardians who watched the activities of people on earth and greeted those people when they left it behind. The sense of being able to see in all directions simultaneously. The sensation of being above linear time, being above everything. The hearing of anthem-like music which entered through one's whole being rather than simply one's ears. Direct and instantaneous reception of concepts that normally would have taken a long time and a great deal of study to comprehend. And feeling the intensity of unconditional love. I mentioned when I started the sermon how our lesson from Revelation sounds a lot like the heaven we hope that our ancestor, beloved, and we ourselves might go. It also sounds a lot like the place that countless people have reported in near-death experiences, like the place Dr. Alexander writes about. It's a place where God is the Alpha and Omega, where full radiance is present and always sense. It's a place where angelic beings greet and watch over souls, where death and mourning and tears and pain and bad acts are not experienced. The Bible has long suggested such a place awaits our souls when we depart our bodies. And many have taken comfort in that idea and the hope the biblical description offers. And that's good news. But we modern folks tend to want more than Bible verses, and so I wanted to make sure to point out that there's more good news for those of us who like objective proof to support the idea and the hope that beyond our bodies, the souls of our ancestors and our beloved exist and bask in the glory of God. There is evidence out there, lots of it. And a well-respected, highly trained professor and brain surgeon has had the courage to write about it scientifically and with first-hand experience. It's a work that gives more hope about the continuation of the soul and its presence with God in heaven. Like the Bible, the evidence Dr. Alexander sets out and affirms in many ways that we are loved unconditionally and eternally. It also allows us to reasonably infer proof of experiences of a good and God-filled afterlife exists, and that our ancestors and our beloveds whose souls have left their physical bodies abide there. And that we will too. It's a place filled with God's no-strings-attached love, which can give us hope that all of us and our beloved may experience by and by the land where joys shall never end. News doesn't get much better than that. There is proof of heaven, and it's okay to consider